Bring it all now to Dan Perry, Global Affairs reporter, also in Tel Aviv for us. More analysis from Dan now.
There's pretty close to consensus in a normally quite divided country that after October 7th, Hamas must be removed at almost any cost.
What are the chances of a diplomatic agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
Depends on the time frame. Right now, basically none.
The man who answers the best answers and asks the best questions. Dan Perry, former chairman of the Foreign Press Association.
Here's the thing. There's an original sin here. The original sin was that the world, Israel, Fatah, the universe allowed Hamas to take over Gaza. And then certain political forces in Israel even thought that might be a good idea.
You cannot begin every discussion by telling the story from Genesis. You need to
But the original sin, it curses us to this day because you're dealing with a lunatic situation in Gaza where no matter where your normal levers, which are to threaten physical violence, seem to not apply. Now, this is a big problem in international, in human affairs, in international affairs, in military strategy. When destruction brings about your defeat and not your victory because your image has been trashed and you're isolated in the world and your economy may suffer and your opponent doesn't mind their country being obliterated, this is a bizarre situation that all traces back to that original sin. Houthis are basically, a lot of people don't know, a militia that has existed for about 20 years in Yemen. They're not the government of Yemen. They're a bunch of thugs and they need to be put in their place. And I think a lot of, some viewers at least who've seen me here before would know me as not a warmonger, but this is craziness.
Today being Wednesday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is akin to Adolf Hitler. This really seems to be just the cherry on top of the cake.
Erdogan is ridiculous. I mean, it gets to the point where it just has to be said. I don't know what's motivating him, if he's lost his mind or if he has some calculation of really becoming a charter member of the emerging global axis of evil. But whatever it is, it's preposterous. We're talking about a president who has eviscerated democracy in his own country, who massively oppresses the Kurds, who has all his political opposition, including judges and journalists and generals in jail, who's done enormous damage to Turkey itself, who occupies a swath of Syria, who just assisted Azerbaijan in committing the biggest ethnic cleansing since World War II upon the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. And he has the temerity to compare Netanyahu to Hitler and Israel to the Nazis. I mean, good Lord. Netanyahu is far from perfect, and I have been a frequent and loud critic, but he is Mother Teresa compared to this pathetic wannabe sultan.
The idea that 51% can decide to do anything is infantile. I think if you ask the people, should 51% be able to kill 49%? Most would agree that's not a democratic outcome.
Qatar hosts Hamas, and yet potentially these are the brokers that may make a difference. Your take?
It's absurd. I watch the world sometimes in utter stupefaction, honestly. When abnormal things become normal, when unacceptable becomes acceptable, the world has some leverage over Qatar. Qatar wants to be accepted as a member in good standing of the community of civilized nations. They host the World Cup. They pretend to be a normative country. I would hope that if the world wanted to do something useful, the West, they would apply maximal pressure on Qatar with a carrot as well as a stick. I have to say, Ellie, this is a truly historic day because I find myself in agreement with Mr. Katz. There is no doubt that if Netanyahu succeeds in bringing about this deal, he will have his majority in parliament, because whatever the right-wing nuts are going to do, Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid's party will certainly support. Hamas is understood to be part of an Islamist vanguard under the control of Iran to various degrees, that is itself at war with moderate Sunni countries that surround Israel. So yeah, I think Israel has some latitude to respond here, but the line of credit is not without limits. The job in the previous rounds was to get Hamas to stop the rocket fire. More or less, that was it. And in each case, that was achieved. Now the trouble is the degree of savagery that we saw on October 7th, the political earthquake that created in Israel, the strategic disaster that entailed, makes everyone believe that we can no longer go back to the status quo ante and something must be done. But Israel risks blundering into a classic logical fallacy, which is something must be done. A ground invasion is a thing, therefore a ground invasion must be done. And I haven't yet heard anyone articulate how a ground invasion would remove Hamas from power without embroiling everyone in not only an almost certain greater loss of life on the ground that would happen October 7th, but risk a massive conflagration in the region, which also, by the way, would be a spectacular gift handed on a platter to Iran. There is a sense in Israel that everything changed on October 7th, and what was before cannot again be. But one thing that will be is that the Holy Land, Israel, Palestine, has 15 million people, roughly equally divided between Jews and Arabs. And the idea of an ultimate partition remains the only solution I can see to avoid a binational, non-Jewish state. And that will remain. And that will remain a discourse in the world after this war is over. And currently, it's not friendly to Israel. In recent days, the chief of staff of the army and the defense minister, who's not just in the coalition, but from Netanyahu's Likud, have both said in different ways, we need an endgame discussion. The Biden administration would like an endgame that gives the Palestinians a political horizon that somehow involves a rejuvenated PA in what is to come after Hamas in Gaza. Netanyahu refuses to discuss it because his hard-right rivals would be displeased, and he feels that would endanger him politically. But this is endangering the strategy of the war, because you cannot establish your route if you don't know the destination. The actual danger was that the court would order an end to the conflict. Now, this court, when it wants to, knows how to be unequivocal. About a year ago, it ordered Azerbaijan to end the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, and that was ignored, of course. The court didn't do that here. So viewers should focus on this. In refusing to issue an order, an injunction, calling for Israel to end the war, the court, in fact, said it's okay to proceed with the war. This is a huge thing. This could be handled better. I have to say, the issue now, what everyone's discussing all over the world, in the Paris talks, in Washington, in Cairo, is how to compel Hamas. What does Hamas really want? Are there differences between political Hamas and Yahya Sinwar in the tunnels? There isn't enough pressure on Hamas, and Israel, partly, is responsible for this. Right now, the pressure's on Israel because of the damage done to civilians in Gaza. That can be flipped around. If Israel were more successful and aggressive and clear in messaging that the war could be ended immediately. The fears of famine, the fears of disease, all of that could go instantly if Hamas agrees to hand the Strip back over to the PA, have the leadership go into exile, and hand over the hostages. It could end immediately. In other words, it's reasonable for Israel at this point to demand a surrender. And the fact that it doesn't even bother to message this point is nothing short of shocking. Because if it did, I do believe most of the world, including the Arab world, would support Israel's terms of surrender. For that, of course, Netanyahu has to agree that indeed, in one form or another, it will be handed back to the PA. And he can't do this for fear of Ben Gvir. This is the price Israel pays for the nature of the government currently in power. But it is strategically debilitating. And the result is there's no pressure on Hamas because there's no apparent day-after plan, and the pressure is all on Israel. It's unfair, but partly self-inflicted.
It does not really present or bode well for the future as far as the options go. Dan, I'm going to extend our view a little bit beyond just this border, just this set of circumstances. That is, of course, the involvement of other Iranian proxies and, of course, coalition forces. The United States and Britain carrying out massive military strikes overnight against Houthi-controlled sites in Yemen. Break down the situation with all the various Iranian proxy militias and armies in the region.
Well, we're asked, not just Israel is asked, the Western world, indeed the world is asked to accept something totally outrageous, that countries around the region host militias that have either their own agendas or are beholden to Iran, whose goal is to destabilize the region, and generally a combination of both. And this is somehow treated as a normal state of affairs. This means Israel is surrounded by failed states. This means key territorial elements of the Middle East, including that which controls the access to the Suez Canal, which determines the state of Egypt's economy, are controlled by non-state players. This absolutely has to end. The world should make Lebanon its own problem and not let Israel handle it alone. It is outrageous that there are 50,000 strong militia in southern Lebanon that basically acts as a state within a state, and no one talks about how that's a problem. Resolution 1701, passed in 2006, which was passed by the Lebanese parliament, which included politicians affiliated with Hezbollah, spoke not only of a withdrawal of Hezbollah from the border, but also of a return to a normal state of affairs in Lebanon, where a monopoly of authority and of power and of weapons is in the hands of the government. This may involve some unpleasant things, like allowing Hezbollah to be folded into the Lebanese army. But at least then, the country of Lebanon would indeed be a country. Its government would be responsible for its territory. And if they chose war with Israel, then they would have war with Israel. But we wouldn't have this lunatic situation where to hit back at the militia involves hitting at a country that denies that the militia is its responsibility.
We always appreciate your point of view. Dan Perry knows that region and the world very, very well from having covered it for so many years, live from Tel Aviv with us. Thank you, Dan. Good to see you again.